Hello, everyone, and welcome to Future Nonprofit, a podcast and YouTube channel where we sit down with industry experts, both in and out of the nonprofit space, to talk about how to build and scale the nonprofits our world needs tomorrow. I'm your host, Ted Vaughn, the co-author of Culture Built My Brand and the co-founder of Historic Agency. If you have not yet checked out the audio version of Future Nonprofit, it is a highly produced, amazing 20 to 30-minute journey through each of our guests' stories. Be sure and check that out. Like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts or here on YouTube. And I hope you really enjoyed today's episode. We talked to some amazing people. If you are speaking on a big national stage and you're walking in and the production team says, Rachel, we have to have your bumper music. What is the piece of music that accompanies you as you walk into this room?
So I grew up in a very religious household, which meant we only listened to Christian music. And I had kind of your typical ultra Christian conservative teenage years, which means I threw away all the VHSs that were, PG-13 or worse. And so I have like this giant gap in my life around like music knowledge. But what I enjoy is very cinematic music. And so I think it would probably be like Banners does this great song. I can't recall the name of it, but Hans Zimmerman does the accompaniment to it. And so it's just big and but that would be like if it was playing in my ears, because my fear would be if that's what I actually walked up to everybody would be like, who does she think she is?
So drama.
Yeah. But there's this band called Cinematic Pop that does covers of really popular music, but very theatrically. And I can just listen to that stuff on repeat. It makes like that epic part of my soul. It just speaks to you.
Yeah. I love film score, and I listen to it all the time. That is very funny, though, about you're one of those kids that tossed out all the all the secular.
Oh, yeah. It was a whole thing growing up in the world that I grew up in.
But you could listen to Stryper and Petra, which was so bad.
Oh, Petra, dude. That was our jam. Yeah.
So bad. Oh, my gosh. I'm a kid of the 80s Christian rock scene, and it was so bad. Charlie Peacock, Daniel Amos. Some of it was okay. But all right. Last icebreaker question. If you had to explain what you do for a living to a 4.5-year-old, how would you, in like one quick sentence, what would you say?
I would say, okay, so you know how when you fall down and you get hurt and you're bleeding and you run to your mom and you need somebody to fix your boo-boo, well, I do that for organizations and systems. I get to heal organizations and systems and give them courage and let them know it's going to be okay.
I'm going to rip that off. I like the boo-boo thing. That's really good.
Well, I just think that at the organizational level, when things go wrong, it feels so scary. That because we're not talking about knees and elbows. We're talking about
Totally.
Giant budgets and people's lives. And if you're in the nonprofit sector, major population level issues. And it feels so big that sometimes it feels overwhelming. But if you can think of it as like, hey, things are broken and for me, I feel like I come to the world as a healer. Like if I was talking to you and you asked me that same question, I have this image of myself as like a modern medicine woman. And, I don't have like all the impressive credentials in terms of education. I have a master's and all that, but like I didn't go to Harvard but I have like this really interesting set of experiences that I've had over the course of my life. And, it very much feels like people come to me not for what I don't have, but what I do have. And it's just all of these things that help me be able to look at systems intuitively and think about how we can make them more whole. And so that's the thing that I love to think about how I work versus like, oh, I'm a CEO.
When I talk with people on this show, there's almost always something in their story of origin that connects to the work they're doing today or to the person they are today in super meaningful ways, whether it's, a moment of trauma, or it's a parent or a coach or a situation or a thing they saw in their home when they were growing up. Something kind of directly relates or correlates or speaks to who they are, how they do their work, what they're doing today. What's that for you? What's the thing that was the most significant? What's the memory that is most profound to you now in the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, I think for me, I only saw it in retrospect. So it's really only been in the last 2 years that I realized how influential both of my grandfathers were and who I am today. So I have my grandfather, Bob Currie, on my dad's side of the family, born in a dirt floor log cabin, rural East Texas. And, no formal education outside of high school diploma, entrepreneur, built his own businesses. And ultimately, by the time I was in high school, when I would go to the state capitol in Austin, I was introduced as Bob Currie's granddaughter, and that meant something. He'd become an agri-lobbyist. But I look at his life and I see someone who believed in the power of people to create collective change. And he never did anything on his own. He was the president of the Houston County Farm Bureau, and he was always working in these very collective, collaborative spaces. And so I have grandpa on one side of my shoulder, and then on the other side, I have my other grandfather, Tracy Henderson, who was a bad dude in Dallas when he was growing up. I was arrested so many times that the last time he was sent to jail, the judge told him, if you show back up in my court, I'm sending you away to prison. And when he did show up again for having assaulted someone, there was just this moment where the judge showed him, leniency. And my grandfather became a Baptist minister and, spent the rest of his life really investing in communities. And when I was in elementary school, we would go into very high poverty communities and do work in those communities. And so I have these two grandfathers who in their own ways were these community organizers who saw the power of what happens when a community works on something. And so then I look back and I'm like, okay, so the first act of my career was doing asset-based community development in Deep Ellum. And we saw it go from a $200 million tax base to almost $2 billion today. And that was multi-sector community organizing. And we served as the backbone organization. But I look back and I was like, oh, my grandfather's had a lot to do with how I show up in the world, and really didn't understand that until my 40s.
What was it like being with your grandfather as a kid? Were they inspiring to you then, or was it just classic grandfather-granddaughter time?
I mean, Grandpa's world. So Grandpa was very much a workaholic. So, I followed in his footsteps there until I had my quarter life crisis. And, he never had that. Our entire lives, he was a workaholic. And so one of my most vivid memories, not most vivid, but one of the memories that comes back to me a lot with my grandpa was I was in high school and we were laying sod in his front yard, and I was helping him and my Mima. And he came out and he asked me if I wanted a break, and I told him no, I wanted to keep going. And he goes, that's that Currie work ethic. And, and I just when I made Grandpa proud, it just lit something up inside of me. And it's interesting because you know me, Ted, I'm relatively woo-woo. And after my grandfather passed, I continued to periodically have these dreams about him. And it's so interesting the way he shows up in these dreams, because he always comes back to encourage me and tell me how loved I am and how proud he is of me. And there's this moment in one dream where I remember touching his arm, and it felt so real. And I was like, it's Grandpa, he's here, But he wasn't a hard man with his grandkids, but he also wasn't that soft in life. And so to experience him that way, postmortem has been this really sweet gift, because I think that's kind of what was always there underneath my grandfather. And I think it part of my story has been through great pain in my personal life, learning how to open up and be the tender person that I am versus kind of that, like, I get shit done. And that's what people really, and letting that be the only side of me that people see. My mom's dad was, I think I saw him much more simply, is what I would say about my granddad. Is, he was a Baptist minister. He owned a transmission shop. And so I loved him very, very much. But it was really more when I reflected on his life as a mature adult that I saw how much he had to overcome to become the kind of human that he ultimately was. And so just having such a deep respect for someone who, I just think people who have the power to change as adults are my heroes. So many people get stuck. And so I look at my grandfather as someone who evolved and changed throughout his life. And I just, as an adult, I'm like, oh, that's the magic sauce. Like, if we can figure out how to continue to change, that's where the really great stuff lives for us.
From what you could remember, what was your first kind of, this is what I want to be when I grow up? Like for me, if you remember The Fall Guy, Lee Majors, it was a big TV show in the 80s and 90s, or 80s. And I wanted to be a stuntman because I was like, I thought that show was the shit. What about you? Like what was your first memory of what you wanted to do as a full-fledged adult?
I wanted to be the first female governor of Texas, and then Ann Richards ruined it for me. And so after that, I wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, because there's this part, like, I live between two worlds. So my family, the Currie side of my family, we moved from Scotland in the 1800s, pushed west, coming in like everybody did through North Carolina, down through Mississippi, landed in East Texas, and my family has literally lived on the same 100 acres since then. So I grew up with like my grandparents across the street, great grandparents, aunts and uncles and cousins. And so there's this part of me that just wants like stability. And so the idea of like a lifetime appointment to a job where everything is just secure and stable. And then I have this entrepreneurial spirit that comes from both sides of my family, that, my grandfather, my dad, my great grandfather, like everybody in my family has started their own business. Like that's just the way that we roll. And so then there's this other part of me that's like the dreamer, the big ideas, the executor, there's this thing in my imagination. I once it's happened to me a couple times in my career, but once something gets in my head and I see it, that entrepreneurial spirit takes over, and I wrestle with it because it almost becomes obsessive. And like, there's this, ADHD brain in me that goes, I got to solve this. I got to solve this. So I look back at that Supreme sweet girl who wanted to be a Supreme Court justice. And I'm like, oh, that was like ultimate path to stability and impact. And, here I am over in the social solutions entrepreneurship side of the world, which feels far more risky. But that's the path that, opened to me, and I'm really grateful to be here.
When you think about your journey, I talk with some people, most people are not this way, but some people have a very linear journey. Like they knew what they wanted to do at some point in their teens or early 20s, and then they charted the path, and they're still doing it today, 20, 30 years later. It's just an evolved version of the journey that started very linear. Other people like me, maybe you, the journey is a lot more like tripping and stumbling your way forward and with some degree of grace, but you don't necessarily, like where you are today, you had no vision for 20 years ago. There's no dot connecting. There is in hindsight, but it wasn't like, you worked your grand plan. Is that you? And if so, what are the major steps, milestones, pivots, times of like great success or great crisis that have kind of brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, I would answer that in two directions, because in If you look at 15-year-old Rachel and you ask her, what's the dream? What do you want to do? I had the dream. It was that first big imagination for Life in Deep Ellum, which was a community cultural center that had a faith component at its heart. We built a national model for community engagement. It was open 7 days a week, even if people weren't people of faith, that they knew it was built for them. We were the backbone for this historic arts and entertainment district in Dallas. And I knew that was what I wanted to build. And by the time I was 36, I had done it. And then, it was this thing I thought would take my whole life to do. And then at that point, there's some stories that I just don't tell anymore because I'm like, my philosophy has become in life, when you have deep, deep pain, you feel it all so that you don't have to carry it. So I won't go into detail, but at that point, that was when I had to begin to deal with the reality of what my personal life was, and specifically what my marriage was. And in some ways, I think I don't know if having such a clear plan gave me an escape route to where I didn't have to feel and be vulnerable to the emotions that were what I would have been authentically feeling and experiencing if I had been connected to my reality for the previous, 15 years of my personal life. But at that point, some things happened that made it impossible for me to no longer deal with reality. I had a PTSD diagnosis around that kind of time frame. And when your body starts yelling at you and says, stop, for someone like me, I had learned a little bit earlier in my career, boundaries are gifts. You don't push through boundaries. So I thought I've got this lesson. I did my first sabbatical. I leave my computer at the office. I don't work till midnight anymore. I've got it together. But there are layers to growth. And that first layer prepared me for my body going, no, really, we're done. We're not going to continue to do what we've done. This is as far as you can go. And when you're a high capacity person and you find yourself laying on the floor in your office crying for hours a day and all the symptoms that come with PTSD, it's a really humbling moment. And for me, I had this experience of really first being super angry with my body and feeling so betrayed. How could you do this to me? I'm a get shit done person. We've got to be able to keep moving. And there's all these, people that count on me. And it was interesting to then realize that every single symptom that I had was a pathway into a very needed healing for me. And so, I land at 40. I guess I was 38 at that point, and 39, divorced, had left this work that I had done for 12 years in Life in Deep Ellum. And that process had, let go of the faith community that I've been a part of for all of those years. And that was the thing I could have never seen coming. It was actually the life that I had promised myself I would never live because, my parents got divorced. My dad was my age when his divorce happened. My parents had been married for 17 years. When I got divorced, I was my dad's age. I was been married for 17 years. So it's are you fucking kidding me? How did I literally, I felt like I was repeating this pattern that I'd spent my whole life trying to avoid. But what was really interesting to me about this experience is before my life, personal life began to unfold the way that it did, I had gone and I'd walked the Camino de Santiago. And for those who aren't familiar, that's about 1,000-year-old pilgrimage in Spain. And so I'd gotten to the highest point of the pilgrimage, which is in Ocibriero, and it's in Galicia, which is the Celtic part of Spain. So you walk into this part of Spain and bagpipes are playing and it looks like you walked into a Celtic village. And I went to the chapel and I was praying something called the triple colloquy. And so you look at the cross and you say, there? Why is it that you're there and I'm here? And as I prayed that, what I felt was just this sense of, you're here because I love you. All of this is because I love you. And, it was a beautiful message to get from the universe. And so I'm sitting there weeping and weeping and weeping. And then I come back within 2 months, everything in my personal life has bubbled up and my body's broken down. And so I'm there at like 39, 40, divorced, all these things have happened. And the message I keep hearing in my heart is, all of this is because I love you. All of this is because I love you. And the last 5 years have just proved that out in a way that I never could have imagined. So I'm in this interesting place where I feel like from 15 to 36, I walked the plan. I saw it. I did it. It was exactly what I intended it to be professionally, if not personally. And then I haven't had a plan for the last 5 years. But these beautiful things keep happening. And, I did have that kind of moment where something got caught in my imagination and it's been unfolding. And that's been super fun to have happen again here at VolunteerNow. But it was interesting. I was talking with someone recently and I was saying it's so different to be someone who had such a plan for the first half of my life. And now I'm at this point where I don't. And the person just looked at me and said, but isn't that how it should be? Like at 26, you need a plan. Like, I'm 42 today. Like 42, you can kind of let it unfold. And I'd never had someone say that to me. And, because we live in like the world of strategic vision, strategic plans, and for someone to be like, yeah. But you are a human and your life unfolds and you've got enough like stuff behind you and experience now that you don't have to know what the next 5 years are going to look like to progress.
Yeah, there's so much truth in all of that. When I started this kind of work of consulting and coaching, the first 10 years was just wrestling constantly with the emperor has no clothes. And now I just get comfortable walking into any room naked. I don't, if I can't be helpful, then it doesn't matter how many degrees I do or don't have. It doesn't matter how, it just, ultimately I'm here for a reason. I have to lean into that, trust that, and then figure it out. That's really good. There's a lot in that will be really helpful. I especially like the tension between having a plan, mapping your plan, doing this plan of school, education, life in Deep Ellum, and then it all blows up. And now you're leaning into ironically, at the most senior time of life leadership, you're leaning into not needing a linear, perfectly orchestrated plan. Connect the dots between where you are today at VolunteerNow, the career dots, and what you were doing in that life in Deep Ellum. So you talked, I think you brought us, we've talked a lot about the childhood path, the opportunity to do this work in life in Deep Ellum, and then the explosion, and then what you're doing today. And then let's start to talk a little bit about the role that you're in, the way that you got there, and some of the things that you're wrestling with today. It doesn't all have to be linear. Why don't we just start with the journey that brought you into VolunteerNow? How did you find your way into the role you're doing today?
So I had a brief stopover between Life in Deep Ellum and VolunteerNow in two places. I was a designer in residence at SMU and then was a vice president of external affairs at a large nonprofit in Dallas that worked on the causes and effects of poverty. So both what I did at SMU and what I did at City Square were because I always had my work outside of work, is the way I described it. So I had what I did at Life in Deep Ellum. And then, if we're going to use, since I came from a faith community, when I had this experience, I called it my second conversion. And so my second conversion was when I started working with a community organizing group that was multi-faith, multi-race, and began to really engage with pastors who had very different lived experience than me because of the color of their skin or their culture or the country that they were from. And as they began to share their experiences with me, I had what I reference as my second conversion, where I realized, hey, all the world doesn't work the way that it works for me and my white presenting family because, my grandmother's a Diaz, but I don't look Latina. And so in that process, I started doing a lot of criminal justice reform work, helped write policy platforms, served on criminal justice coalitions here in North Texas, helped get, marijuana decriminalized, signed onto suits around trying to get cash bail abolished here in Dallas County. So a lot of that work became this space where I saw the power, and this is, again, pointing back to my grandpa, the power of collaborative efforts to create change. And because of my background in divinity, which is very history focused, I knew that the way we really change the world is people movements. So I was at this point where I was starting, I had 4 different companies that were kind of recruiting me all at the same time. And I had the one that I thought I wanted to work for. VolunteerNow had talked to me and I told them no. And then I'm sitting in an interview for this job that I think that I want. And all I can do is talk about VolunteerNow. And I had this out-of-body experience where I'm watching myself going, you are not going to get this job. And why can you not stop talking about VolunteerNow? So after that interview, walked out going, well, I'm not going to get that job. I went home, put on my consultant hat, and just tried to get underneath the hood of this organization as much as I could. And that was when I had that matrix open moment where I realized this organization had all this essential components to drive real change and how much it aligned with my personal philosophy of people are how we change the world. Because I had done policy, I had done programs, I'd done faith-based work. But I feel like lasting change is when you figure out how to capture people's imaginations and then you work towards this really big collective action. And I think volunteerism is a beautiful way to do that. So I called them back and I was like, hey, I actually think I might be interested in this job. The beauty of it is I have a board then and now that they wanted someone to come in who was innovative. They wanted a change agent. And so where a lot of people would walk in and have this mandate for change, but then get pushed back all along the way, it's been a very different experience where for the last 3 years, I was really allowed to go through this iterative process, which can feel there's a lot of ups and downs when you're iterating quickly to try to find that unicorn idea, but it's panned out, and we have this in the next 3 to 5 years, we're really going to be going after a moonshot of an idea. And if it works out, I will be very happy talking to you in 5 years because it's the kind of thing that you go, man, this will be fun and stretching and it's scary and it's big and I can't do it on my own. Yes, let's go do it. So I ended up in a volunteer-oriented organization because I really do believe in the power of people to change the world for good. And volunteerism is one of the most natural expressions of building people power, what we call here volunteer power.
Will you say something as well about the mantra or idea that we kind of teased out when we were together in the very first workshop? I think it was around the notion you can't heal what you won't touch was the short version of it. But I think there's something really powerful about that fits in with what you just said. So just riff on that for a second as well.
What I have seen throughout my life, whether it was as a kid going into high poverty communities with my grandfather or the work that I did with unaccompanied minors crossing the border in Texas or, the homeless in Deep Ellum, whatever it is, what I found is you have to be close to people in order to actually create generative change. So part of what I think is wrong with the world is is we lack proximity to one another. So people with the resources here in Dallas tend to live, north of 30. People without resources tend to live south of 30. And there's no space where we're really engaging one another. So you've got all the money in the world, because Dallas is an incredibly affluent community, and you've got deep poverty. We had couple of years ago, and I don't think it's moved that much, Dallas actually has the third highest child poverty rate in all of the US. So we may have dropped down to 4 or 5 now, but it's shocking that we would have that level of child poverty. But the problem is if the way that we say it here is you can't heal what you don't touch. And so when a corporation calls me and says, hey, we want to do a volunteer activation, but we don't want to have to drive the 45 minutes to come to North Dallas to South Dallas, it makes it incredibly challenging, because to create people movement, I don't just need your bodies. I need your heart. I need you to be in relationship. And so there is an incredible difference that comes when you actually build relationships. And what people find is you come in as a volunteer thinking that you're there to transform the community, but you find you're the one who's transformed. And it's because relationships heal us. Relationships with people who are different than us restore our humanity to us. Because it's this, if you think of yourself as a whole human, we tend to think of ourselves in isolation from others. And so, especially in the West, we're very individualistic. So we cut ourselves off, and I, as a human, am what is contained in this body. But I think what is more true is that I, as a human, it's how I relate to others. And if I only know how to relate to one kind of individual, that's the depth of my humanity. If I learn how to relate to someone who's very different than me, that's another level of my humanity. If I can engage with children, if I can engage with older people, if I can engage with teens, if I can engage in multicultural settings, that's how we find more and more depth of who we are. And so that's our whole mantra here is you can't heal what you don't touch. And that healing goes, it's two directional. It's not just about you walking in as the savior, healing a community. It's about your humanity also being restored in that process.
It strikes me, Rachel, that idea, that notion, that mantra is something that you would have said 20 years ago. I mean, having known you for a long time, that's not like a new thought, a new idea, maybe it's more fully realized and you're leading into it at a different level. But in some ways, that's always been you, I think. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would say what I understand to be healing is very different today than what I understood 20 years ago. Coming from a very, I never want to feel like I'm communicating in any way that's derogatory of the faith and the communities that I came out of, because they were all a part of my healing also, and they were all they were part of my healing and my brokenness at times. But that's humanity, and so 20 years ago, when I talked about healing, it was very much centered in saving people's souls. Because it was a very evangelistic kind of community that I grew up in. When I talk about healing today, it's very different. I have a very pluralistic view of the world. I think God comes to you as your life. And so I believe people find God, the universe, whatever their higher power is, and how they have been brought into the world. And so it has a lot of language and a lot of creeds and a lot of ways that can show up. But the healing is really more about making society and the world more whole and more just. And that is a much harder work, in my opinion, of how do we actually restore our humanity together, not just, be a good person because I do and don't do A, B, C, and D.
Yeah, and it's always ironic to me because you hear people share their view on faith and spirituality, and then they almost feel apologetic. Not that you are, but there's almost an apology because it's like it doesn't sound perhaps evangelical enough.
I am way past trying to be even
No, I know you are.
I think I'm on the nobody had to excommunicate me because I kindly walked out of the rooms that I knew.
Yeah. But the irony, though, Rachel, is that it is what you're describing tethers back to the heart of the Jesus you see in Scripture.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For me, it's increasingly less about a theological, philosophical debate and more about a cultural debate. We've built this thing and we've made it sacred, which is ironically the thing in the Old Testament that God time and time again despised.
Yeah. Well, and, I love Barbara Brown Taylor's. There's a specific quote of hers that resonates with me deeply when she says, if I have to choose between love of my neighbor, love of my religion, I'll always choose my neighbor. Yeah. And I feel like that's what Jesus was constantly putting in front of people when he was speaking with his disciples and religious leaders in the community is you keep trying to make people choose religion, and I'm telling you, love people. And that for me, it was really interesting because part of my work at Life in Deep Ellum was, pastoral. Like I preached, I did the whole thing. And what I found was growing up, when people would go through a quote unquote crisis of faith, everybody would have this oh no, we've got to pray for so-and-so, and they're going through this crisis of faith. But what I saw was, in my experience, as people went through crises of faith, what was actually happening is their view of God was getting bigger and more loving and kinder. And it was like I almost imagine something shedding its skin so it can grow. And that's been my experience of faith, is as my view of God as truly infinite, as truly loving, and I don't want anybody to trip up over my use of God, higher power, whatever word serves you, as that got bigger and more loving. The faith that I was given when I was 5 didn't work for me anymore. It had to change. It had to evolve. And I think that's a great kind of test for us to look at, is there's nothing that we believed when we were 5 that didn't need to mature with us as we grew. So why do you think that the things that you learned in Sunday school at the age of 5 should be what you're holding on to at 15 and 30 and 45? And there is a level of depth that we expect people to mature into. And some communities aren't comfortable with going, hey, that maturity looks different on different people. And there's a lot we could say there.
I want to talk now. I want to focus squarely on now leadership. You're a CEO in a serious organization in Dallas. We've done a lot of dot connecting. I think you've done a great job of peeling back the onion of you. What, as CEO of VolunteerNow, is the best part of your job, and what is the worst or hardest part of your job? And actually, best and hardest, those are not necessarily unrelated. So let's just keep it in the best and the worst. What is maybe the way to say this? What is the most life-giving part of your job, and what is the least life-giving part of being the CEO of VolunteerNow?
So there is this thing that folks like me who are entrepreneurial do, and I referenced it a few times, where you have so for me, I would say my gift to the world is I can find the gaps in systems that if we can fill them, it will make the world a better, more whole, healthy place. And doing that in generative ways versus extractive ways. And that is so fun for me. So I absolutely, I was walking at White Rock Lake. A lot of my really great ideas come whenever I'm out on long walks. So I was walking at White Rock Lake, had this idea. I feel like I've unlocked a new level with AI. So I've learned that AI responds to signal quality. And so when our quality signaling, so the deeper you go in your work with AI as a thought partner, the more breadth it offers to you. So it's really interesting. It's almost like if you think of AI as a mirror, and it's reflective. And so if you can, in your work with that AI, not rush, if you can hold ambiguity, like there's this whole list of really interesting things and I've only been able to name it in retrospect. So it's like, why are we working together like this? This is so cool. But what happens is rather than it being a reflective mirror that just like reflects you as if you're standing right there, it's almost like AI starts to back up further and further and further. So you're seeing wider and wider expanses of the reflection around you. And so to be in an organization where we can come up with really great ideas, use advanced technologies to help us refine those ideas in world-changing kind of ways, that to me is so fun. And I get to work with phenomenal leaders on my board, in our community, who are willing to go all in on like big, bold ideas to see, because we know if we can make these real, the risk is worth it. So I love that. The part of my job that is why every time I do this, I say I'll never do it again, is the entrepreneurial process, even when you're doing social solutions and entrepreneurship, is so inherently risky. Someone only gets called an entrepreneur in retrospect. You don't get that moniker until you have succeeded. And so when you're trying to make something real that doesn't exist yet or exists but not in this iteration, there's just this inherent sense of we are putting it all on the line for an idea that I will not be able to prove until I prove it, because there's not a lot that I can point to and say, see, this is why it's going to work. So I live between those two tensions of loving the courage that it takes to go after something and then dealing with the anxiety of the risk. That would probably be the best and the worst.
When you think about the decisions that you've had to make in the last 6 months to 12 months, what decision would you be most proud of? Would you want to put on the wall and frame and highlight like a degree? And what decision would you kind of not be the happiest with, or in retrospect, wish you had made or done differently? And I know I'm not talking about regrets. That's a different mindset. I just mean when you analyze the decisions in a retro, which decision would you say, would have made that differently?
I'm going to start with the challenge and then come back to the positive. Mid-year, this 2025 was just one of those years in the nonprofit sector where the way I described it, when people would ask how we're doing, I would say our house isn't on fire, but the whole block is on fire. And so you're dealing with the smoke, and you're dealing with like trying to help neighbors get out of the fire. And so one of the things I had been brought in to do was really kind of right the ship for VolunteerNow. And we'd been very successful in that, and success, impact and revenue. On the revenue side of the house, this was the first year that I was looking at a deficit, and it was not an insignificant deficit. And that really hit me hard. And, there were decisions that I was having to navigate that aren't the kind you talk to your team about. And it was the first time in my entire career where I understood the saying, leadership is lonely at the top. I mean, my entire career, if someone, me, Ted, if someone said that, I was like, oh no, it's not. But it legitimately was. And, in a perfect world, you want to lead as like a non-anxious presence in those moments, and you want to lead with courage. And, but my response was, I will fix this. And I did, and we are ending the year with our best revenue since 2013. So the piece of it that I would say I hope I never do again is I solidly, for the first time in a long time, saw myself step into that over-functioner role that has, I think to say almost killed me would be an exaggeration, but that I have lost myself in previous iterations of my career. And it's such a weird place because you're extending yourself because you don't want others to pay the price in terms of having to release individuals, and reduction of force, and you don't want to let people down, and you've got to continue to build momentum because we're building towards this giant strategic plan that we're launching in 2026. So you've got to go in strong. But I look at it and I paid the price. I felt every single bit of what it took to get there. And I would hope in the future I would find a way to share that across my team versus like strapping up and just like force of will making it happen. The thing that I'm most proud of is at the same time, there was a part of me that did what had to be done and then took a step back and said, I'm not going to keep going like this. And when I took that step back, the irony of it is, Ted, that's when everything started to fall into place. And these things that I couldn't have made happen by any force of will just started to like drop in. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And so it was just this really beautiful reminder of the difference between efforting my way into something and trusting that the thing that is in my imagination is supposed to be real, and trusting that I'm not trying to do it on my own. And so I think the thing that I'm like, learn the lesson, Rachel, stay away from like the efforting. And then that space of like active trust where it's not that I'm not working hard still, but it's a very different posture of the scarcity versus the abundance.
I think you've already answered this question, but just in case, I want to ask it anyways. There's this movement around healthy work-life balance, not burning out, and some boomers might be critical of millennials and Gen Zs as being lazy. But then there's also, as a result, kind of this backlash where now like a lot of content I hear online is like, I won't hire anybody who talks about work-life balance. That's bullcrap, da-da-da-da-da. And I think both are true. Like we're living kind of in this strange world of this tension between these two important ideas, working really hard, hustling, at times your life peaks, but then not letting that peak become normative and staying healthy. And again, you've been addressing this. What practically does that look like for you now? You're in your 40s, you're a senior leader, you're in a big organization with a cause that will take everything you have to give and not say thank you and keep asking for more. What do you do practically to manage that reality? Because you have to work hard, you have to hustle, you have to at times do the 70, 80-hour work weeks, but you can't live there. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, McKinsey and Company has a really good framework for this that I love. So I was in one of their cohorts and they have this quadrant and it's like low energy to high energy, negative emotion to positive emotion. And you have all of these different emotion feeler words that you put in these four categories of, what's positive and high energy. So passion, excitement, what's high energy, negative emotion, anxiety, whatever. But ultimately, the point of it is like you have this low energy, positive emotion space, which is like peace and calm. And then you have this low energy, negative emotion space. And ultimately, like this one, low energy, negative emotion is burnout. Low energy, positive emotion is restorative. So the one above that, that's the high energy, high emotion, that's performance. And most leaders want to stay in that performance space where we're experiencing high energy, positive emotion, but you can't. Like if you stay there, you're going to move over into the high energy, negative emotion, which is survival. And then if you stay in survival too long, you're going to drop into burnout. And that is the pattern that I experience so much of my career is I'm a high energy, positive person. If I stay there too long, I'm going to move over into survival, then drop down into burnout. And so the way we prevent that and the way we talk about it on our team, the way that I've learned to practice it is you have to have an intentional move between performance and restorative practices. So you have your daily restorative practices, which for me, journaling, working out, spending time with my family. But then you have those bigger restorative practices. Like I take every day of my vacation, every day of it, every year, because I work really hard and there need to be moments when I entirely disconnect and my brain and my nervous system reset. And so then I can come back and I can perform. So that to me is the magic space of what we have to be able to do is understand what's that optimal frame for how long you can stay in performance. And then what do you need in micro and macro doses to be able to drop into those restorative practices that feed your soul. And my bigger picture of why matters so much is I believe you can never be more generative in your work than you are healthy. So it's not my ability to perform that is actually my ceiling for what I can do. It's my health. And so when I am at my optimal health, the work I do is going to be way more generative and life-giving to me and the world than if I'm coming at it from a different place that's not actually all that healthy.
Yeah, there was a study, I can't remember where it was, but I'm going to try and find it. But it looked at people in a boat, the competition rowing where they're all rowing. What's that called? Crew or whatever that's called.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the study said the boats that had B+ performers, but they were B+ performers working in sync, always outperformed the boats that had A+ performers with a couple of C. Because the gap between those performers is what created way more friction and problem, and all those other A players on the boat couldn't fix it. So better to have a boat of people working in sync that aren't A+ than a boat where you have a mixed bag working out of alignment, creating friction and sideways energy. Last kind of big idea is around learning and contribution to the broader community. You've been leading for a long time. You have convictions, thoughts. You're operating at a senior most level in a large nonprofit. Maybe it's if or a when question, but let's just hypothetically say you're invited to speak to a room full of other nonprofit CEOs that match kind of the profile of this audience. What do you feel like you're most passionate about sharing with them, kind of instilling in them, if you could? What's the conviction that you would most want them to walk out of the room applying to their life because of how well you articulated it or communicated it?
I feel like I could walk up to a podium 25 times and have a different, it's...
Well, you can pick two different podiums, two different people.
I think the thing I want our sector, the nonprofit sector, to be most honest about is that we are resource constrained. So if you look at the nonprofit sector, you exclude health and education systems, we hold approximately 1.5% of the GDP in the US. So you think about the charitable, the compassionate arm of our economy that said, hey, we need to solve for poverty and homelessness and. We're working with 1.5% of the GDP, which isn't nothing. But it's not like you can't solve the world's most intractable issues with 1.5% of the GDP. So what I would love is for us to just get real honest. And, we do all of our work on impact measures and showing, because so much of the work is philanthropically driven. Our revenue here, we're 80% earned revenue. So we have we have a lot of bit of luxury that many of my peers don't have. But I think it's important for other sectors to begin to understand if we don't figure out how to increase investment in the compassionate arm of our economy, we are going to continue to just remediate problems and not solve for them. And if if people haven't looked at three-sector theory or cross-sectoral bias theory, I would also point them to that, because what cross-sectoral bias theory says is, in theory, between public institutions, corporations, and nonprofits, everyone's needs should be met. But the reality is the only people who that applies to are the people that we already have empathy for, that we have high views of warmth, we have high views of their competence. So their needs are going to get met in society, but all of those folks who are on the margins that we don't have natural empathy for, those are the people who keep falling through the cracks. Those are the people that feel the resource constraints most acutely. And so let's get really honest, one, about the resource constraints that we have, and then two, how hard it is to actually get the resources to the people who need it the very most, because their stories aren't the ones that automatically move our hearts. So that bit of like, hey, we've got to be transparent about this or else it's never going to change, would probably be my first call to action. My second would be, when I tell my story and I think about the first part of my career, the way that I describe it is I believed so much in the mission that the way I showed up as a leader was, hey, you see that mission? It's worth dying for. Come and die with me. Like, we're going to all die getting this done. And there was... I wouldn't sacrifice my morals. I wouldn't sacrifice my children. But there was very little else that I would not lay down to make the vision real. And it cost me, it cost the people on my team. And I walk away from that going, I will never again ask someone to come and die with me. My approach instead is, hey, you guys see that mountain over there? You see that hill over there? We're gonna go do this thing, but we're gonna dance up it. We can do serious things with great joy. So my love language is flutterfetti. Everybody knows, like, if there's a major you've seen it, Todd. If there's a major celebration, there's gonna be confetti, there are gonna be streamers, there's gonna be champagne. It's there. We don't have to do things in a way that are not life-giving, we don't have to. Does it mean that there's not hard decisions? Does it mean that there's not, challenging? Absolutely not. But there is a way that we can show up in the world that is life-giving. And that is what I think our job as senior leaders is most fundamentally. Am I creating a culture that is life-affirming? And if I'm not, there is no way we're going to change the world. How do we get to life-affirming outcomes without having life-affirming work? And so that would be the other thing that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I would bring streamer and confetti and all the fun things that we do to that stage and invite people to experience what it is to do great things with joy.
It's such an interesting idea, just even the irony of this statement. We're going to kill ourselves so that other people can live.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, what's wrong with that statement?
Well, and it's very much rooted in the way that, because many nonprofit leaders have a faith background. And so it's like Jesus died so that we could live. We've been called to take up our cross and follow him. And it's like, I just look at that and I go, look, there was, if that's your faith tradition, like there was one Messiah, come, gone, did the thing. I don't actually think that is, like, the point is more about the resurrection and what came next than, so I have a lot of feelings about that. But I think it was something that was taught to us and we have to unlearn.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, depending on the tradition or the culture or even the tribe, you associate with, there's either more emphasis on the come and live resurrection or on the come and die. And rarely do you find people who understand the relationship and the interaction between them.
Yeah, and if you don't come out of that, you just come out of the business space where the expectation in the corporate world is like, hey, we are going to compensate you at a level that we own you.
Exactly. Which really is an invitation to death more than to life, ultimately. If you talk to people who make that money, it's...
Yeah. So there's just this whole space where I think wherever you come from, figuring out what life-affirming work is your job as a leader.
For more stories from experts in the industry and to learn how to take your nonprofit into the future, like this video, subscribe to our channel and podcast, and visit makehistoric.com/insights. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Ted Vaughn, and this is Future Nonprofit.